overseas banks and foreign central banks and foreign governments, and it's just totally amazing. To me, I've been worried about this and concerned about it, but it's still even shocking to find out how big an issue this is. But one thing that's on our side is economic law makes it so that they can't continue, because if they continue to do it, the whole system breaks down, which is terrible, because that'll be much more damaging than what we're putting up with now. So my goal has been to get more people to understand how the Federal Reserve works, how it's not in our interest to have big government. Government is, the designated government we have by the Constitution is very, very small in scope. The Constitution was written mainly not to regulate you, but to regulate and limit and control the federal government. That's the purpose of it. Couple other things in there that were very important. But magnificent about the Constitution is about this big. I mean, how many bills do we pass in the U.S. Congress that are that big? They're usually about this big. You can't even carry them around, and nobody really fully debates them. But the Constitution gave us the monetary clause. You know, only gold and silver could be money. You can't print paper money. So we ignore that. So we've done that for a long time. There's a clause in there that says that, you know, going to war should be done very, very cautiously. It's a national issue. It's not a state issue. We should have a defense. We should be prepared to defend ourselves, but carefully and cautiously, and never with the one person, the president, making those decisions. It is so serious, the founders said, that it has to be done through the people, through their elected representatives in Congress, and then we only go to war with a declaration of war. I guarantee you we'd be fighting a lot less wars if we fought. Well, they did recognize in the debates about the proper role for the president. The president is the commander-in-chief. And there are a few exceptions that are very important. That if we are attacked, or if there is an imminent attack, the president has a responsibility, obviously, to defend his country. But that has nothing to do with the war in Korea, the war in Vietnam, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Pakistan, the war in Libya. And it just goes on, and Congress is just totally derelict in their duties. I'm, you know, very much in favor of bringing all our troops home. Yeah. Not only has our president, you know, gone into Libya without permission and spent over $1 billion there, and that's only beginning. And these countries that are revolting over there against some of the governments that we've established, like in Egypt, giving them tens of billions of dollars, they are becoming more radicalized. Matter of fact, I think that whole system is going to backfire and hurt Israel rather than helping Israel. But if you look at what the president is doing at this current moment, he's in the Far East. He's decided to put thousands of troops in Australia. I mean, what do you need to have your troops in Australia for? We need our troops at home. But, he said, well, we have to send a message to China. I didn't know China. I thought that was over. And, you know, we quit fighting China after the Korean War. But this whole idea that we're over there looking for a fight. You know, the Chinese spend 1/7 of what we spend on our military. We spend all this money. We're $4 trillion more in debt because of the foreign policy and the wars in the Middle East in the last 10 years. So we're over there. We've lost 8,500 Americans, 40,000 severely injured, thousands looking for help at our VA hospitals with post-traumatic stress syndrome. There's an epidemic of suicides going on. It's an utter tragedy that is going on. And here we are expanding our role overseas. I just think that if this is the place to come. This should be the most popular. This is the place that conservatives and liberals should be able to come together and say, you know, we have a tough place here at home. We have trouble taking care of medical care for our kids and the elderly. And we need to work our way out of this. Why can't we all agree? Why can't that committee, why couldn't a Congress, or why couldn't that super committee say, look, This is the easiest place in the world to cut. Let's cut the overseas spending. The good news is a lot of people agree with what I'm saying. A lot of people in this room obviously agree with it. The bad news is there's not very many in Washington. I mean, all you have to do is listen to the debates. I mean, the other candidates are ready to go to more war. When are we going to attack Iran? Iran can't even make enough gasoline for themselves. They don't have a nuclear weapon. They're no more ready to attack us than Iraq was. Iraq had no nuclear weapons. They had no Al-Qaeda in there. They used to be our allies. We pumped up Saddam Hussein, and yet we went to war over that and had all these tragic losses and have essentially contributed to our bankruptcy. So this makes no sense to me on why we're doing this. And it would be the way that we could start. I want to cut $1 trillion the first year in office. The way we have this worked out in the budget is that the big hunk will be on military spending. No money out of national defense, because militarism is not equal to defense. Defense is different. For years on fighting these battles, when I started speaking on the House floor against the war in Iraq, it was 1998. That was when the policy was being changed. That was 5 years before the actual war started. So this is something that has been going on for a long time. But the arguments were always met and implied indirectly and sometimes directly. Oh, if you're not for the war, and you're not for the spending, you're not for the troops, you're not pro-American, you're unpatriotic. But the question, if anybody puts that up to you, if you take this position and they tell you that, then ask them, why is it that the Ron Paul campaign gets twice as much money from the military people as all the rest of the candidates put together? A lot of things happen in Washington because they want to use a lot of fear. Fear with the people and fear even with the members of Congress. Oh, if you don't go in and start a war with Iraq and we're attacked, and they scare and intimidate, and too often the members of Congress who aren't thinking for themselves go along with it. But that happens in economic policy, the end of the economy, if you don't bail out the rich type of thing. But there was another time that was a sad time for our history and a tough time for us who defended the Constitution, and that was right after 9/11. There had been legislation floating around for decades that was equivalent to the Patriot Act. They wanted more control over the people, less secret, less privacy for you. So the Patriot Act wasn't written as a response to 9/11. It became an opportunity for it. But the final version of the bill appeared on the floor about noontime one day, but it was within a week or so of 9/11, and everybody was frightened, and they said, here, we have to pass this. So we went to the floor. Nobody really had a chance to find out exactly what was in it. So the bill came to the floor, and of course, I did the natural thing that a constitutional should do. I voted against it. Because I was sitting next to a member, another member who was a friend, and he was voting yes for it. I said, why are you voting for this? I said, you haven't even had a chance to read it. He says, yeah, but under these conditions, I mean, after 9/11, and it's called the Patriot Act. He said, what am I going to tell my people when I go back home? How am I going to explain it? I said, well, that's your job. Your job is to go home and tell them why. You at all, but I just assume repeal the Patriot Act. We don't need it. place and a different approach would lead us to be perfectly safe on the airlines without the TSA as well. They changed the rules and they started doing a lot of super x-raying and super prodding and probing that was a little more aggressive than most Americans cared about. So I wrote a piece of legislation, didn't go very far, but the legislation was that any TSA agent that did any groping that you or I could do with a stranger, he would be arrested. There's a little booklet called The Law, written by Bastiat. It's an economic book. But he has a basic premise on law, and it's a fantastic little book. If you ever haven't read it, read it. It's called The Law by Bastiat. It was written in the 1850s. And his basic premise was that if you or I can't do something, you know, we're not allowed to steal, we're not allowed to use pressure, we're not allowed to defraud, we're not allowed to counterfeit money. If we can't do it, the government's not allowed to do it either. The IRS would have a tough time. Because you're not allowed to take from your neighbor just because you need it or want it, so why should the government? Why should your neighbor be able to go to the government and say, you know, I want some stuff from him because he has more than I have? And all these